Hi everyone, this lecture is on the education pipeline. So when studying education, researchers often focus on the ways in which an individual or groups of individuals make it through from birth, essentially, or the cradle, all the way through college and beyond. So the educational pipeline really sort of tracks who makes it all the way through, who falls out at particular transition points, and tries to really understand what gets in the way of a person being able to achieve their educational goals and ambitions. So, in a more formal sense, the educational pipeline refers to the persistence of an individual or groups of people through the education process from cradle to grave. Now, the word persistence has a sort of more technical term when we're talking about research, when it really is talking about success, meaning either graduation or successfully making it through classes. But in the case of sort of large scale studies, it really is about making sure that you graduate and hitting particular benchmarks, as we'll see a little bit later. The education pipeline can be conceived in terms of series of successive transitions, each of which can be approximated using available education statistics. And this will become a little bit clearer as we get further into the PowerPoint, because you'll see the very specific transition points we're talking about. In terms of early conceptualizations of the pipeline, researchers thought that the pipeline begins with strong early childhood education that prepares young children for success through their academic years. And then from there, it goes to the highest quality elementary, middle, and high school education, which all focus on preparing students for success in college and beyond. When we talk about early childhood education, this is really from the ages of 0 to 3. This is a time period in which even the youngest of children are socialized into kind of good habits for school. Things like playing, um, working well with others. Just as importantly, and particularly relevant to nowadays, the amount of time people spend reading to their children. These are all really important in terms of making sure that the youth are ready to go on to preschool and to kindergarten. Now, later on, and then I would note that when the pipeline theories first came out, they only covered through college because college was often considered the ultimate goal. But over time, what we've seen is that as more people have achieved their bachelor's degrees, in order to sort of be able to be even more competitive in the market, more people are needing to attend graduate school. So the idea of the pipeline theory evolved to also include both both college and postgraduate work, meaning that you successfully completed college and that you either went on to get a master's degree, law degree, doctorate, any of those things. So looking at this more conceptually here, we see that the pipeline starts over here on the left with pre-K, and that each of these are kind of mark educational benchmarks. When you go from pre-K into kindergarten, and then obviously within kindergarten to 12th, there's a lot of different sort of mini transitions. But in terms of the focus, in terms of research, they look at kind of the beginning and the end of what we call required education or compulsory education. In other words, compulsory education is the education that you are required to attend by law. So we know that all of us were required to uh, we're actually required to go to school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And then in terms of educational research, we'll look at what we call a category called some college. This often refers to students who enroll in college but subsequently drop out or don't finish with getting degrees. Oftentimes, when we talk about college degrees, this can be broken out further into associate's degrees, which you would get at a community college, as well as then a bachelor's degree when you get your college degree. And then we would look at transitions at the graduate degree level, which could be master's of social work, master's of urban planning, and other sort of master's level classes, and then degrees. I'm sorry, and then finally we have the doctorate degree as being the ultimate end of that pipeline. So as you're looking through the readings, I think it's important to reflect on a question like what might impact a person or group's progress through the educational pipeline, and to think about it from the micro, meso, and macro levels. Now, I think that we're all pretty clear of what happens at the micro level. So I think it's actually really important to think about what happens in our communities that can impact education. What are some macro level issues, meaning the law or policy that can impact a person's progress through the educational pipeline? And so, on the meso level, from a community level, this can be the environment you live in. It can be poverty. Actually, poverty might be more macro level. It could be safety. It could be resources of schools. From a macro level, it could be things like financial aid policy. It could be homelessness, etc. And these are issues I want you to think through as you're looking through the sort of educational statistics. I would recommend, in some ways, pausing here and making sure you study the slide a little bit. This is the California Educational Pipeline by Race and Gender from 2013. And for part of what this depicts is what's happening for both women and men by racial group. So starting at the left, for Latinas and Latinos, for every 100 students, if you start with a group of 100 students, of those 100 students, 59 women would get a high school degree, or 57 men would get a high school diploma. In a group of 100 Latinas, 11 would get a bachelor's degree. And in a group of 100 Latinos, 9 would get a bachelor's degree. And then we see subsequently, out of 100 students, 3 women would get graduate degrees, 2 men would get graduate degrees. And then at the very bottom, that's 0.2. Whether you're a male or female, we get a doctorate degree. So what that calculates out to is that 1 out of every 500 Latinos or Latinas, 1 out of every 500 would get a doctorate. These are extremely low numbers relative to the rest of, a lot of the other groups. So moving on, oftentimes we use whites as sort of and particularly white males as our sort of barometer for looking at sort of numbers in higher education. So for whites, taking a group of 100 students, if you'd have 94 women who would graduate with high school diplomas, or 94 men who would also get high school diplomas. So you only see 6 people fall out of the pipeline there, as compared to Latinas and Latinos, where you have you essentially have 41 women fall out of the pipeline, and 43 men fall out of the pipeline at that same level. You have 38 of whites, 38 women would get bachelor's degrees, 42 men would get bachelor's degrees, 14 women would get graduate degrees, 17 men would get graduate degrees, 1 woman would get a doctorate out of every 100, and 3 men would get doctorates out of that 100. So multiplying that, you're really looking at, it'd be a 15-to-1 ratio at that doctorate level for whites relative to Latinos. And then as you see, as you go through here, you can look at the different numbers for men and women. The number for women is the left hand number, and the right hand number is the number for men. Again, we see higher level, the Latinos of all groups actually have more people fall out of the pipeline than any other group. Even more so than Native Americans, and here in California at least. So as you're looking at this chart and studying it, I'd like you to think about what structural issues, societal issues, would impact these groups differently, such that their educational attainment might be, so that we see the educational attainment of particular groups be decrease as they go through the pipeline. So these are something to think about, and you should also correlate this with what's happening, with what you're reading about in the reading. Now, with the Latino numbers, I think it is really important to disaggregate Latinos. And so here are the numbers for Latinos and Latinas in the California education pipeline by citizenship and gender. So what we're seeing here is basically the question here is, what is the impact of immigration and citizenship? And so what we do is we disaggregate. And when we talk about disaggregating, that means taking something apart, right? When we disaggregate those numbers, you see that U.S. born Latinas and Latinos um, do significantly better compared to naturalized citizens and non-citizens. So for U.S. born Latinas and Latinos, if you had a group of 100 students, 83 Latinos would get a high school diploma, and 80 men would get a high school diploma. 18 women would get a bachelor's degree, and 14 men would get a bachelor's degree. 6 women would get a graduate degree. 4 men would get a bachelor's degree. So, and then here you see 0.4, we get a doctorate, and 0.3, we get a doctorate out of that same group of U.S. born Latinos. So what that kind of factors out to, what that 0.4 factors out to, is usually about 1 out of every 250 Latinas get a doctorate. Roughly 1 out of every 300, or maybe about 325 Latinos get a doctorate. Moving over to naturalized Latinas and Latinos. So these are individuals who immigrated to the United States at differing ages, and who took the citizenship test and became U.S. citizens. So for these naturalized students, we already see at the high school level that a lot more of students are dropping out before they even get their high school diplomas, as compared to their U.S. born counterparts. So of 100 students, 56 for naturalized Latinas and Latinos. Of those 100 students, 56 women would get a high school diploma, 55 men would get a high school diploma. Each in this group would get 10 would get a bachelor's degree, 3 would get a graduate degree. And here we see the doctorate level. 0.2 of Latinas who were naturalized would get a doctorate. That's 1 out of every 500. 0.4 Latinos who were naturalized would get a doctorate. That's roughly 1 out of every 250. So for non-citizens, Latinas and Latinos, this includes both documented and undocumented citizens. Documented and undocumented immigrants. Of those 100 students, only 34 would get a high school diploma for both men and women. Again, here we see the huge difference when you compare it to the U.S. born Latinos. That number is less than half. 4 would get a bachelor's degree. In terms of Latinas, 3 Latinos would get a bachelor's degree. 1 Latina would get a graduate degree. 0.8 of the men would get a graduate degree, and 0.1 for the women would get a doctorate. 0.09 would get a doctorate. That's roughly for both men and women, 1 out of 1,000 would get a doctorate degree. So here, by disaggregating the data, it tells us a different story. When we've talked about social structures in this class and social processes. And so the question I would ask on something like this would be, what does the process of immigration do? How does the process of immigration impact education? And so again, here we want to think through what impacts educational attainment differently across these different types of groups. Here's another presentation of very similar data. This is actually national level data, which is really important to note. We've been looking at California numbers. And so when we look at the Latino pipeline, and this came out of Yoso and Solorzano's research from the UCLA Education Center. For every 100 Latino elementary school students, 46 students will graduate from high school. 17 students will of them, 26 students will enroll in college. Of that 26, 9 go directly into a 4-year college, 17 go to a community college. Of those 17, only 1 student transfers to a 4-year college, and 8 students graduate with a bachelor's degree. 2 students earn a graduate or professional degree, and less than 1 student graduates with a doctoral degree. So again, this gives you sort of a different presentation of the pathway that Latinos are taking into higher education. As was previously noted, as you'll see in the reading on Latinos in higher education, we know that Latinos are attending community college at a higher rate than any other racial group, and this is sort of what demonstrates it. But equally important, it's to note that only 1 out of every 17 of those Latino students actually transfer and go on to get their bachelor's degree. And that's something that we need to figure out, right? What structural issues are happening there? So I want you to be able to discuss the meso and macro level issues that can impact educational attainment for Latinos and Latinos. And so think about this to the different relative to the different readings that we've had for this week.